Valley. And if you do nothing else, you say, well, probably one of the best states in the world is the state of California. Sort of very far removed from economic crisis. It's not. It's basically this incredible innovation engine driving things. This was the case, for example, in the 1930s. The fifth best economy in the world, but the single best place to be was the state of California. Conrad and sort of the Steinbeck Grapes of Wrath novel, people basically moving from Oklahoma to California. Today, I haven't actually looked at this, but I suspect if you were to look at it, the strange thing would be like people are moving from California to Oklahoma. You can sort of question, what does this mean? And there are all sorts of ways, of course, all these things can be rationalized. You can say basically the median wages aren't accurate, or the wage calculations aren't accurate, or that technology takes time, even though 37 years seems like a long period of time. You can basically say that there is a lot of stuff happening we don't quite know about. You can say things are just getting so much more efficient in California. We don't actually need any more people left, and that's why everybody's leaving. But I do think are sort of all these worrisome signs that things are not incredibly well. I think the places where there has been tremendous progress over the last 40 years has been in the computer and internet industries and some of the related industries, telecom, maybe mobile internet at this point. But I think one of the questions we have to ask is, even though there have been a lot of incredible companies created in these sectors, is whether these are the ones that really drive progress, whether how much progress they will be driving in the decades ahead, versus, say, a whole series of other kinds of technologies that people thought were going to happen in the 50s and 60s that did not. So if you were to look through the kinds of science fiction projections from the 50s and 60s, you're going to have robots. You're going to have robots like the Jetsons definitely by now. Future History of the World, according to Star Trek, 1967. The original series was Permanent Lunar Bases by 1980, Manned Mission to Mars by 1990, and we'd definitely be at Alpha Centauri by now. Sort of shifting gears, Space Odyssey 2001, that was set in Jupiter. From Jupiter in 2001. You basically have all sorts of other themes where ideas about exploring the oceans, and 70% of the Earth's surface is going to be developed, turning deserts into forests. It sort of gradually has been abandoned over the last 40 years. A number of areas, biotechnology is one that I think is theoretically a place that should be happening at an incredible rate right now. It's sort of a lot of progress in some of the basic science, but when you look at the actual numbers, there were far more drug innovations in the 70s and 80s than in the last 20 years, and people who've been investing in biotech have basically made new money for something like a quarter of a century. And so there is something on a high level that's gone seemingly strangely wrong with it. One of the I sort of a lot of thoughts on what's gone wrong. I have a lot of thoughts on what should be done about it. I think it might be best to come back to that sort of the context of talking about what's going on in Silicon Valley startups and building companies. But I want to just maybe give 2 or 3 high-level thoughts on this before we go into that. One is that I think there sort of are 2 modes of thinking about the future, and these terms are always imperfect. But one way about thinking about it is that growth happens intensively or extensively. And you can define extensive growth as taking the best things in the world and replicating them and sort of expanding them extensively. Intensive growth consists of taking the best things in the world and making them better. Technology innovation is at its core something that's intensive. You're taking the best things and you're trying to make them better. Most of globalization, which is an incredibly important and valuable phenomenon, is fundamentally extensive. And so this is, I think, to the extent extensive growth has been incredibly valuable over the last few decades. It's driven a lot of good things in emerging markets. It's driven some bad things in the U.S. You probably think of the housing thing, parts of the credit thing as ways in which extensive growth just went literally haywire in terms of people turning the entire country into suburbs or something like that. But I think this extensive versus intensive dichotomy is what I found to be incredibly helpful for thinking about. If you think of China and the U.S. as sort of two competing models for the future, China, in a way, has a very straightforward plan for the next 20 years. It's all extensive growth. China's business model for the next 20 years is to basically copy the U.S. and to basically catch up to the U.S. There's no need for any innovation in China. There may be some that happens, but for the most part, the next 2 decades will be about bringing China and much of the rest of the emerging world into 19th century plumbing and 20th century railroads and basically catching up to developed countries. For countries that are developed, like the U.S., Western Europe, Japan, the only way I think you really make a lot of progress is through intensive growth, and that sort of involves innovation and coming up with new things. If you want to think of it quantitatively, you could say that intensive growth is going from 0 to 1, and extensive growth is going from 1 to n. And there's a sense in which going from 1 to n seems like it's arithmetically a bigger deal than going from 0 to 1. Geometrically, 0 to 1 is sort of a lot different. And I tend to think what you want to have an optimistic future is some combination of extensive and intensive growth in the world economy. And I think sort of where a lot of things are at today is they are sort of in a massively extensive direction. People think extensively. They think we need to scale things. We need to do more of the things that are working. And they're not thinking nearly enough on an intensive side. And I think this is, of course, deadly for tech innovation because to the extent we try to do tech innovation extensively, it actually doesn't work at all. And you basically end up saying, well, we will only invest, like the sort of the standard venture capital catch-22 version of extensive funding is, well, we'll invest in companies once they're working. Once you've gone from 0 to 1, we would love scaling it from 1 to n, because the 1 to n thing seems really predictable. You just have to get from 0 to 1. Once you've gotten from 0 to 1, we will be happy to invest and go from 1 to n. And even though I think venture capitalists may be sort of